Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. I want to welcome those of you who are joining us for the live webcast, and also those who are with us in the audience here today to have this important discussion on what we are going to talk about: registered apprenticeships for the early childhood workforce. As you know, my name is Linda Smith. I am the director of the Early Childhood Initiative here at the Bipartisan Policy Center. And for those of you who are not familiar with BPC, we are a Washington, D.C. based think tank that tries to take the best of both sides of the aisle to put together policies that we think can solve the nation's most pressing problems. And for those of you in this audience, I think you all know that childcare is a very pressing issue for our country right now. So what we know about childcare is this, is that the quality of care that children receive depends on the quality of the workforce and the adult-child interactions that goes on within programs, whether they're home-based or center-based. We also know that we have serious challenges for our early childhood workforce. First and foremost, low pay. We've got a wage problem, and we all know that, everyone sitting here. The second thing is we have barriers, real barriers to our workforce getting the professional development and access to higher education that they need. So our purpose here today is to shine a light on registered apprenticeships as one pathway for moving this nation forward for the workforce to gain both educational and economic opportunities for advancement. Let's see if I can make this work. Okay. What we know, according to the Department of Labor, is that over the next 10 years, for each year, we anticipate adding 180,000 new workers to the early childhood, to the childcare workforce. That's a lot of new people coming into this system, and we are going to have to figure out multiple strategies for how we work with this workforce and get them the preparation they need to provide the quality of care that we need for our children. We think here that apprenticeships are one pathway forward for this group of people. I want to go on and just review quickly the workforce as we know it. And fortunately, we are going to be seeing an update of this data here soon, Shannon, I know. And this data comes from the National Survey of Early Care and Education, the 2012 data, which you see before you. By way of background, this is the most recent data we have, but as I said, we expect to see updates coming very soon. But just to note that we have about 1 million center-based teachers and caregivers in the workforce in about 130,000 programs. So we have a big task before us, and another 1 million paid home-based childcare providers. So with that said, we know that from the data that we have, that was more encouraging, I think, than a lot of us expected back when we did the first survey, was that we have about 53% of the center-based workforce that has some level of college degree. That number is lower, as the data shows, for home-based, but still, that means that 47% of the center-based workforce don't have any degree. And that's what we really need to figure out, in addition to the new people coming in, the 180,000 that we have coming in. How are we going to get to that 47% and get them on a pathway to something that has sustainability? And I think as I was thinking about this, getting ready for this, I think we've made progress in, did I go the wrong direction? Yeah. I am not good at this, so. Going the wrong way. Okay, let's go that way. I think I've skipped over a slide or two here. So let me just quickly go through a couple of the things that I wanted to. Let's see if I can make this work. Here, yeah, this one's the right slide. I apologize for that. In terms of the good news in the 2012 data, and I think this is often overlooked, but I think it's actually a point that needs to be made to the audience, is that according to the data in 2012, and we'll see what has happened since then, the average years of experience of people in the workforce in the center-based category was over 10 years of experience, and in home-based longer than that. Now that's good news, because that means an investment in the workforce will pay off. and that we need to be thinking about how we keep those that are in the workforce, but that it's worth the investment because they are staying longer than I think the public perception has been. And I think that's good news for us. So one of the things that we have, let me see if I can make this work. The wrong way. That we've been looking at is, as I said, the apprenticeships and the WIOA Act, which was passed the same time as CCDBG. And the WIOA Act actually encourages a broader use of apprenticeships. And so if you look at this, included in those now there are a number of factors that came into play with WIOA, but I think one of the most important is the focus on apprenticeships and requiring apprenticeships to be on some of the state workforce boards, which means that that's shining a light on these programs and was an important investment, I think, by Congress when this was passed. So what's the current status? We have apprenticeship programs for early care and education right now in 16 states, and they're shown here on the slides. Later on, you're going to hear from 2 of those states. West Virginia is with us, and they probably have, I think, the oldest early care and education apprenticeship program in the country. And then the Pennsylvania model, which is evolving, I think, over time and expanding across the state. And we're learning important things from that. So now we're going to move on to our first panel and talk a little bit about where we are with all of this. So on this first panel with me, to my immediate right is Shannon Christian. Shannon is no stranger to early care and education. She is currently the director of the Office of Childcare, but comes to that position with a combination of good federal as well as state experience. Her federal experience coming the first time with the Bush administration in the Office of Childcare, and has been at the state level in Wisconsin and Illinois. And so she has that perspective of both state and federal. Next to her is Sarah Ritalin, a good partner to us here at BPC. She is the executive director of the First 5 Years Fund here in Washington. Sarah has worked at the federal level in both the House and the Senate side in Congress, and has a very strong reputation for building bridges in this city. And I think that she brings an important perspective to this conversation. And finally, we have Michelle Figler, who is the Vice President of Learning at the Heinz Endowment in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Prior to that, Michelle was the Deputy Secretary for Pennsylvania's Office of Child Development and Early Learning, and has also served as an Executive Director of the AEYC in Pittsburgh, and has a great combination and is very interested in the apprenticeship model that has been going on in Pennsylvania. So now I'm going to jump to some of the questions that we have for the panel. And by the way, at the end of this, we will be taking questions via the email and Twitter, and also hear from our audience here that's live with us today. So the first question I'm going to ask Shannon. And Shannon, I think just in a nutshell, we know that there's a demand for early care and education, child care in particular, and it's higher than ever before. Yet we seem stuck in some ways in terms of how do we get ourselves out of this constant argument about low wages and then fix this barrier that we have to training and higher education models. So we've talked about this, and just wanted to hear from you what you see as the opportunities for apprenticeships in your work at the national level, and what excites you about this program model.
Okay, well, the Office of Childcare and the research team that gets our $40 million from Congress have been aware of this complex web of issues that play a role in the childcare workforce shortage for a long time, which we can't get into all the pieces. But the sort of bottom line for this is aspiring and existing childcare teacher caregivers need access to options that meet them where they are, including addressing their own needs and challenges in order to increase the levels of knowledge and competencies that are aligned, and have those things aligned to a system of compensation. And they need both pre-service and in-service pathways, and those need to include a mix of online and classroom learning, supervising, observing, mentoring, and coaching. And what's exciting about the apprenticeships is I think that they offer a solution that addresses these barriers. And without, as you mentioned to me earlier, solving the whole problem at once. You could jump in and do this now, or you could do it as part of a broader professional development system, but we don't have to wait for that whole thing to get done before you jump in and do this. So what I think that we found out, that we already knew, but was confirmed at these series of roundtables that we held last fall around the country in various regions, is really that whether you talk to the providers or you talk to the childcare workforce stakeholders that were there that do the training, what they really agree that student wants is are professional development options that work for those that are already working in the field, that the acquisition of knowledge and skills is tied directly to increased compensation, and there's a path to progress and achieve. They want stackable credits, transferable training and credentialing. That may be where it gets a little harder. That's the more systems piece. And options that can include but don't rely on academic degrees. And there's important work being done in that area now, which I'll get to if we have time later with another question. At the after the roundtables, we also had a request for information that went out to the public, because you can only reach so many people in person. And it was interesting to find that cultivating the provider workforce was the most frequently commented upon option, of the questions that we asked. And they talked a lot about compensation, but also the need for additional support in getting professional development and the need for benefits, which isn't just health care and maybe time off, but also scholarships and loan forgiveness. So there is this need to have a different way for people who can't just drop everything and go to college. And so I think that that's what excites me about this, because as you mentioned, so much of our workforce is already in place. We need a whole lot more, but we can't just chuck that group and start again. Right. So I think that figuring out how to help that group build on what they already know, incorporating the best research we have and the new strategies that look more at sometimes competency-based training and other models is, to me, really exciting. And also at those roundtables, we had several states that, when they got to talk about the things they were proud of and had done with their new money, apprenticeship came up a lot, and there were 2 that were featured as innovations in that in those series, and one of those is a speaker here today, Pennsylvania, Cheryl. So I think that there's just a lot going on with apprenticeship that fits with our overall agenda and people's needs. It's realistic, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. I want to go to Sarah, and Sarah, ask you to talk a little bit about how federal leaders can play in all of this, and what you think is, the role here in Washington to support things like that are going on in the 16 states, because I think some of us would like to see 50 states involved in this. 16 is a good start, but what's the federal role in making that happen?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Linda, and thanks for having me. I mean, I think the federal role is not unique to this program, but writ large, as we were talking about childcare and early learning and care and the issues we're trying to solve for at the federal level, is in fact building from what's happening on the ground, whether it's at the state level, local level, or programmatic level. Whether it's Shannon going and listening at roundtables and learning directly from people about what is needed. I think the list of what you identified in terms of what people want out of an apprenticeship program is exactly what we're trying to do here at the federal level, which is provide states the opportunity, the tools to be able to do exactly what you heard. And so I think there's the listening part of knowing exactly what people need and addressing the solutions and identifying how we tackle the numbers that are up on that board, as well as learning from states like Pennsylvania, which I know is very popular today, or the other 15 states, about how we can provide the tools in which other states can learn from those, do what they're doing, so we can reach more people faster and tackling the numbers that you had on the screen.
Yeah, and I think shining a light on these programs is helping. I do think that. I think since I've been watching the apprenticeships, and Michelle, you can jump in on this one, in what we learned in a visit to Pittsburgh to see what was going on up there. We've seen things start to evolve and more interest in the apprenticeships thanks to everything that's going on here. I'm just curious as to what you think in your role at the Heinz Endowments, what you think the role of philanthropy is in all this, and how does philanthropy help get this going in more states?
Sure, and thanks for having me here today. I come with an advantage that I was at Octal as Deputy Secretary when 1199C came to us and said, we have this great idea, and it's already being funded from some of our philanthropy partners, so William Penn Foundation, Vanguard, and actually Kellogg. So being in that state position and saying, wow, this really is going to take a collaboration. When I moved to the Heinz Endowments, it was just a very easy leap for me to say, we need to think about this strategy here at the endowments. What I was seeing is that our giving was, while it was great, it was very siloed, right? So we were having investments in professional development, investments in CDA programs, investments in higher ed, and investments in workforce, but not from our education portfolio. To me, the apprenticeship is a real strategy. So it allows us as a funder to look at all the things we were doing kind of separately and bring it together. It also allows us to think about the role we can play of bringing these groups together. So I have to say that while we might not have put as much resources on the table yet, what we really are doing is giving our time to get the apprenticeship up and running. It has taken groups that typically haven't sat at the table, sitting at the table, especially the Workforce Investment Board, which we've been very lucky that we have a new leader there. So I'll just also say quickly, though, that I think from our vantage point at the Heinz Endowments, equity is what drives our work, or that's what we're working towards. And the apprenticeship program really allows us to make investment in the incumbent workforce, like Shannon talked about, which is critically important to us because we know that our workforce are African American women, and we haven't, I think, we haven't appreciated their experience. And the apprenticeship allows us to build off of their experience. It acknowledges it. They are an equal player at the table. So,
You brought up something which I think is really important, and I want to ask all the panel to comment on this. I think that one of the beauties of the apprenticeship model is it brings people to the table that we don't traditionally work with. And I think in particular business, which we need to do more in terms of outreach. But, you know, when it comes to some of these things, so what do you all think where are the opportunities for using apprenticeships to get more interest outside of our early childhood silo, as you said? And I do think that we tend to look inward at times, and we need to do more. So be curious as to how you think we could do more of that and where the opportunities are.
I mean, I'll start by saying I think the relationship with the workforce investment boards is like the first step. So getting that relationship between the early childhood community and the workforce investment board and not seeing it as a threat, but a reciprocal relationship. I will have to say that that takes resources. We can't ask people to come to the table and collaborate without putting resources on the table that allow them to actually take time out of their day. Registered apprenticeships, that it resonates with the business community. So what I'm seeing for the first time, I have other industries saying, oh wow, this is a real registered apprenticeship. We understand how this works. We want to come and learn more about it. And then they understand that, wow, without childcare, their workforce can't go to work, right? So it's just a natural leap, but we're starting to use the same language, which I think has been a struggle in our field, that we, you know, we all have our own dictionary, and this has allowed us to bridge.
Yeah. How about you guys? What do you think?
Well,
Sarah?
I mean, I think that obviously I agree 100%, and resources are critical to driving that. But when you think about what other sectors are finding solutions or communities are tackling things, they are bringing multiple public-private partners to the table to try to tackle the solution uniquely to their community. And I think apprenticeships is an example of that, where you are bringing in the business community, you are bringing in the higher education community, and others, frankly, to tackle that. I think at the federal level, when you think about and you're hearing about apprenticeships, it's not in the context of our work. It's in the context of the economy right now. It's in the context of what business really needs, tying directly back to then the childcare piece. And so I think there's a real opportunity at the federal level in connecting it up frankly, to some of those other industries that are looking at it and how we're connecting to that. And the White House has a workforce advisory board right now. I know this is a key piece of that as well, where they're bringing in different industries and businesses and looking workforce writ large. And we should be at that table and part of it. There's no reason why we shouldn't be, especially again, given the drastic numbers that we see.
Shannon, what do you think?
Well, I am intrigued by the idea that you are helping to reach the business community with that, because we have tried to reach the business community. We had them as a stakeholder in these roundtables, and I think it's an exception for business leaders still to have made a really strong connection between the needs of their current workforce around childcare and their business operation. And it's way better than it was 10 years ago, by far. So that's moving in the right direction, but there's still so much for them to understand. But if we can have in our toolkit of how we reach them once we've got them convinced this piece and it resonates with them, then we need to incorporate that into our strategy.
And Shannon, I want to follow on with one quick question to you, and maybe Sarah, have you talk about this a little bit. You know, are there funding opportunities? Because, you know, Michelle, you mentioned that you just can't come to the table, and you need to put something on the table for people to be interested. And so, Shannon, are there opportunities in the child care money to fund this work?
I think there are. And so we, of course, have the quality dollars that are that require every state to put 9% minimum of their block grant towards activities that support quality, and this would qualify for that. And besides that, it's now at 9%, but there's also a 3% on quality for infants and toddlers. So that's a lot of money. And even though that has been an upward target for states and just now hit the maximum of 9, which was in the legislation, they're already, as of 2018, at closer to 12% on average. So they do that, and they use it for a lot of different things that have to do with professional development or QRIS development or higher rates for higher quality. But there's no reason that they couldn't also use it in some way here. And then there's also the preschool development grants that went out. The last year we had about 46 people who got the Birth to 5 preschool development grants. Those have transitioned into a year of what is it when you get to carry over your funding? So even though they might not have gotten chosen to do the implementation because that group is much smaller, they still have their money to spend, and the business groups and a lot of other stakeholders were required to be part of it. And the money that they got in that first year was supposed to largely go towards engaging stakeholders, doing a really thorough needs assessment, and then doing a lot of strategic planning. So I think there's the opportunity to be at the table and trying to move that forward. And then, of course, we have all our TA dollars, which once we're through helping states with meeting the requirements that were in their last reauthorization, which do include higher reimbursement rates for providers of subsidized childcare, which it fits with this a little bit, they can start getting into some of these broader pieces of the framework that some are already doing. I don't think they stopped doing it when reauthorization came in, but I think it had to take sort of a back seat to some of these things around background checks and health and safety training for everybody. And so that's kind of where we are on it, but there's definitely an opportunity.
Yeah. Sarah, what do you see as opportunities at the federal level right now? I know that you're working on some ideas, and what's your thinking?
Yeah, so obviously I think PDG, preschool development grants, and everything you said is a lever we should be pursuing. I think integrating into other laws where available as they come up is also critical to this. So whether it's higher ed or other things like that, and WIOA. And my advocacy response is I think we need new funding, frankly, if we're really going to tackle this in a significant way, and that's what we're working on, is new funding tied to early childhood in particular and apprenticeships. So I think it's a little bit of both, and I think leveraging what states are doing in service to that, it's not just going to be the federal government, but I do think we do need some more money.
And I do think that this still remains, and I keep saying this, early childhood itself is still a bipartisan issue in this city. contrary to what a lot of people want to say, I mean, we really do have a lot of agreement that childcare in particular is a serious issue for the country, and there are opportunities there. So I think that if we put our heads together, we can figure this out. I think what we need to do now is to move some to the audience questions. We've been asking the audience that we have here with us to write questions, and also you can submit questions via Twitter or email. So we do have, we have quite a few. Are you guys all ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay. Here's one for the first one. Can you speak to how apprenticeships support equity in the field?
Do you mean equity for the providers or the children?
I am guessing it means for the providers. Let's say it's for the providers.
Well, I think we touched on that a little bit by saying that because it can train people who are already working, which includes the existing field, which has a lot of minorities and other people that might not want to go back to college right now. That's a lot of the older people in the workforce. But I think that it allows you to have a pathway to move forward and achieve without going the academic route.
I think that
is more of an equalizer.
Absolutely, and I think I'll add, when I look at the numbers and you look at the incumbent workforce and the amount of college that they have, but they might not have completed. So you think about what that does to someone's earnings, right? So if they have student loans that they haven't paid back, that is going to impact how much money they're actually bringing in every month. It's also going to impact the equity they have, right? So how do we look at that workforce and say, this is a strategy that can actually help them with the credits they already have and keep moving them forward. But also because the apprenticeship model provides so many supports around it, it can unpack for each student, I think, whatever the barriers are. Right? So it's not like you go to school and then something happens, a wall goes up. The apprenticeship program makes sure that those walls keep being broken down. That's the equity part of it.
Okay. Anything? Great. Okay, another one that we have is, what can advocates and local programs do to support and raise awareness of new workforce strategies? Where you guys all fall, well, maybe not you so much, but as advocates, you know, I think you've said a little bit of it, Sarah.
I think knowledge is power, and we can have all these great things happening, and if nobody knows about them, then they're not going to keep getting support and continuing.
Yeah.
And so I think the more we can draw attention to this piece as a solution, as a community partnership, as you're doing here today with both panels, I think the more ground we're gonna make at all levels. So knowledge sharing.
I'll just add at a local level, right, as an advocate for the field, because I can't help but be that. When we work with our county executive or our mayor, out of the gate, we're having them think about this issue as a workforce issue, so that when they're looking at other spaces inside city or county government and other opportunities for funding, because we can't just keep slicing and dicing the Childcare and Development Block Grant, we got to add to that, right? We got to add. We are pushing to say, look, you have to remember this is also a workforce issue, and we need a well-compensated workforce, or we're not going to have the best outcomes for kids. So, you know, making that case with our local leaders as well is really important.
Michelle, I want to ask you this next question, because I think it's an interesting one, and I do think because of your background, especially in heading up an AEYC organization, it says, how do apprenticeships fit in the continuum of other professional development? And I know we often get this question about, is it a degree or is it this? I mean, and I think that, well, first of all, opinion, we should stop having that conversation. But
Right.
how do you think it fits?
So what I'm watching happening in Pittsburgh a lot with Cheryl Feldman's leadership from 1199 IC, getting her to come from Philly to Pittsburgh, is that these organizations are sitting at the table together. So we have our local AYC, which is called Trying Together now, it's a chapter, who provides the professional development, and then we have the community college, and then we have the four-year college, Carlow University, and the Workforce Investment Board. And out of the gate we say it's not one or the other, but we have to think about how do we have a continuum so that the professional can enter at any point. and that the professional can decide for themselves, like, I want to keep going or I'm going to stop here, but that we as the system don't make that decision for them. So that, and we also try to push ourselves to think outside of the box. So one of the things that still haunts me is a woman that was very, very dear to my heart who passed away. And she finally earned her bachelor's degree at the age of 62. And all the years of non-credit bearing PD she took, she probably could have had a PhD. You know, year after year after year. And if we would have just said that will count for a little bit of credit, because she made that decision. But the system was saying, oh, she'll never do that, but she did. So we can't underestimate the people in our workforce.
I think that's really well said, and I often think about this issue, and the good news is, and I think some of what's happened over the last time period has moved us from what I used to call the one-stop workshop,
One and done.
to a more comprehensive approach to this being one of those things. But I think we have moved beyond, you know, sort of that, trying to get our arms around this. I think we're getting close to the end here, but this final question, I think, for folks here is, how do we make the case that early care and education is a high-value profession worthy of others' investments? What would you advise?
And it's a little bit related to what you were saying. I think we have to be careful about thinking, and I think it's hard with this, but that you can achieve a really high quality, be a really high quality childcare worker without the degree. And I think we have to guard against those degrees being the only way that we get respect, because I think it works counter to what we know is emerging from the research as other exciting ways to achieve quality across all kinds of settings with all kinds of different backgrounds with a different kind of intervention. Like there's a really interesting one going on at Harvard's Graduate School of Education right now that has been statewide across Massachusetts with all these different quality levels of teachers. They have been coming up with defining what really moves quality and doing sort of micro interventions around that and seeing incredible results. And so we have to find a way to not do it as an academic only answer. How, and we don't have time to really get into it, but I think that bias around center-based and academic degrees is going to hurt us if that's the only way we think we can get respect and acknowledge that childcare is important.
Right. You know, I've said for many years in my experience with the military system is that we had a really good mix of training and education, and I think, and pathways for people to move forward on, and I think that's the sort of what we need to think through here. What is the right mix and who needs what? And I do think that there's more work to be done on that. I also think as we get into the next session, I would really hope that we can talk about a little bit about leadership and sort of how do we actually work on with these apprenticeships and leaders of some of these programs, because I think you can always have a you know, without a good leader, you don't have a good program.
Yeah, and that was a huge part of the conversation, and has been a huge part of the conversation in the K-12 system. Not that I think we should be trying, but I do think there's a lot there, whether it's ladders or pathways and leadership and all of those things that professionalize and create paths.
Yeah, I think it's not one-dimensional anymore, and I think everyone here has made that point. And again, just as you know, this topic, at least it's opening another way for people to get what they need to do the job. And I think at the end of the day, obviously, it's very important to keep our eyes on the child and what are we doing for children in this country. We need multiple ways to get to that child. So,
but we also can't get stuck just on wages and compensation, because we're doing a lot of work at an ACF that's looking at other things like organizational climate and the supports for professional development. Is your director on board, and can you implement what's learned, and is there respect and this culture of continuous learning that some of the applicants to jobs care about as much as compensation. So you need a compensation threshold of some sort, but that alone won't do it. And we're trying to identify what else makes that an attractive field. And I think we need to be paying attention to that.
I think there is no, I always say there's no single solution to a complex problem. And so I think we've got a complex problem. The numbers speak for themselves. And we have got to figure out how we begin to tackle this and not just suggest that there's one size fits all. So I think what we're going to do now is take a quick break here and move into the next panel. Before we take that break, I want to introduce Suzanne Morris, who you will see when we return, who is a fellow here at BPC, and she will lead the next panel. She also comes to us, we are heavily represented from Pennsylvania today, let's be honest. But she comes to us from Pennsylvania, where she was the former deputy for OCDEL, the Office of Early Childhood in Pennsylvania, and did a lot of work on the apprenticeships there. But she's a fellow here now at BPC, and she's going to introduce the next panel. So we'll take a quick break, transition to that group, and then be back with you. So thank you to this panel
you.
very,
Thank
very
you.
much.
You're welcome. This was
Appreciate
fun.
it.
Welcome back, everybody. Hi, I'm Suzanne Morris. I am a fellow here at BPC, and I am really delighted today to be welcoming our state panel so that we can hear a bit more about how Pennsylvania and West Virginia are implementing their apprenticeship programs for early childhood. To the right of me is Cheryl Feldman. She's the Executive Director with District 1199C Trading and Upgrading Fund. She is an apprenticeship guru. I was very fortunate to work with Cheryl when I was in Pennsylvania at the state level. To the right of Cheryl is Jamila Jones. She's currently a teacher with the Parent Infant Center in West Philadelphia, and she is also an apprentice, and we're really excited to hear your story today, Jamila. To the right of her is, sorry, just losing my place. Jennifer Conkle. I just want to make sure I get your title right. You are the Apprentice for Child Development Specialist. You're the statewide coordinator with the River Valley Child Development Services in West Virginia. And you've been in this world of apprenticeships for about 5 years now. Okay, wonderful. And to the right of Jennifer, we have Paula Stewart, who's an infant toddler specialist with the River Valley Child Development Services and a former apprentice. So very excited to hear you tell both sides of that story. I'm just going to take a moment to allow our states to walk us through their apprenticeship models so we have an understanding of what the apprenticeships look like in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. So we have a few slides here, and I will try to do my best to keep them moving forward, starting with Pennsylvania and with Cheryl.
Thanks, Suzanne. Such an honor to be here. Thanks for having us. With the support of the William Penn Foundation, we launched our first apprenticeship program in early childhood in 2017 with 36 apprentices at Community College of Philadelphia. Since that time, and it's only been a little over 2 years, we have grown that pilot program into a statewide system of early childhood apprenticeship across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And we have developed that model as a degree-bearing model that starts potentially at a pre-apprenticeship level in high school with the CDA, moves to an associate degree in early child care. It's actually ECE to pre-K 4, pre-K to 4, and then the bachelor's degree. And we have that whole continuum in Philadelphia. Our partners across the state are key to implementation. We've developed a system that has a lot of flexibility where there are 7 regional hubs around the state, each one led by an intermediary. That could be an employer, it could be a nonprofit, it could be a higher ed. And the partners that collaborate with that intermediary, workforce organizations, we have technical assistance organizations, coaching organizations. The key is that the Training Fund, our organization, is the sponsor for all of the apprenticeships statewide. So we have one sponsor with a standardized set of expectations for the entire state. Next slide. So our program model is to wrap around support services for the apprentice and the employer. Remember that what makes apprenticeship different than higher ed is the work that's happening in the workplace, the learning that's happening in the workplace, competency-based learning, and we use the NACCE standards as the framework for those competencies, aligning the higher ed's focus on the NACCE standards and NACCE accreditation with the NACCE standards being implemented in the workplace. And so we have this seamless continuum, but with a lot of supports wrapped around it. And maybe in questions we'll get to the cost factor, because apprenticeship is not cheap. Registered apprenticeship is not a kind of an easily funded program, and we braid many different funding sources. Next slide. So what we've done is we've created one set of umbrella standards. They're called the Apprenticeship Standards for every program in the state. That means that every program is recognizing the NACCE standards at the CDA, AA, and BA level. The same standards exist throughout every apprenticeship program in the state of Pennsylvania. That is the unifying factor. But it then gives the higher eds the independence to create their own degree program to align with those standards. And every higher ed is also supporting on-the-job learning for college credit to accelerate the degree attainment. The regional intermediaries are key, but so is the statewide infrastructure. And one of the big pieces that we need to mention is TEACH, which has funded most of the tuition for the apprentices. TEACH has been a fantastic partner to us. So on the next slide is a summary of our results. To date, in just 2 years, we have 134 apprentices and 16 pre-apprentices growing every day. We have 62 employers at the table sponsoring apprentices. Some are union, some are not union, from small, mid-sized mom and pops to large corporate multi-site employers. We have 24 proud graduates, and Jamila is one of them. Jamila will tell her story. She graduated at the AA apprenticeship, and now she's an apprentice at the BA level at Arcadia University. It's taken the associate degree an average of as short as 1 year for people who are already matriculated to 3 years to finish the AA degree. Arcadia, our BA partner in southeastern PA, is a 2.5-year program to get the BA, accepting all of community college's credits en masse with no prerequisites required to move into the BA. And we've seen an annual wage increase of $2,000 over the course of the apprenticeship, with 4 wage increases, recognition of competency attainment throughout the course of the program instead of having to wait to graduation. Wages is a major unresolved issue. We are addressing partially the wage issue by having these wage increases, which make a big difference. But the bar is too low at the starting point to get us to the living wage by the end. We have 7 regional intermediaries at this point and growing, 7 institutions of higher ed, ourselves as the statewide sponsor, 2 statewide technical assistance agencies. And we are so thankful to the support of OCTEL, our Office of Early Learning, the Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry, which has supported our expansion statewide, and just wonderful philanthropic funders, William Penn, Kellogg Foundation, Vanguard, Heinz, and the Philadelphia Foundation. So it's been the braiding of so many different supports and resources, and has made this whole initiative possible. We're very thankful for that support.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer with West Virginia. And Jennifer, is it true you're the oldest early childhood apprenticeship in the country, I believe?
We are.
It's an esteemed record.
We are.
It's fantastic.
We began in 1999, so this is our 31st year. We had several events last year to celebrate 30 years. So we actually have a lot of similarities. As you were talking, I was very intrigued and surprised and happy about that, since we have done this for so long. We have a lot of similarities in how our programs are set up. But being the first, it was kind of trial and error, so our program has evolved over the years to what it is today. We, right now, this semester, are serving 45 of our 55 counties. When a person completes our program, they are awarded a certificate from the Department of Labor and from the ACDS program. They get 2 certificates. The ACDS certificate certifies they have done the coursework, and then the Department of Labor certificate certifies that they have completed their training hours. We've had several different partners help fund this from the beginning. We've had Workforce, the West Virginia Department of Education, we've had Higher Education, the Department of Health and Human Resources, River Valley Child Development Services, and of course the U.S. Department of Labor. Our program is, I think, unique in that we have our own curriculum. So we are a 4-semester, 2-year program, and each semester has its own set of criteria. We are aligned with West Virginia licensing regulations and our standards, our infant, toddler, and our preschool and our school age standards, and we also teach best practice in AC. as well. Right now there is a small cost to take the apprenticeship program, and it's only $25 for our students a semester. So by the end, they have invested, either them or their employer has invested $100 for a 2-year education. So yeah, we're really, really excited and happy about that. Our next slide. We have several different partners that send students to our classes. It includes Head Start, we have center-based childcare, we have family childcare, we have public pre-K and kindergarten aides, we have preschool, private preschool, after-school programs, and home visitation. So our curriculum will take students from birth to age 12. Like I mentioned, the instruction is for 4 semesters. We have class once a week, 2.5 hours, and then they get 2 hours approximately worth of homework, and it's for 15 weeks a semester. And traditionally, our semesters are typically start in August and run through November, December, and then pick back up in January and run typically through May, and then we have the summers off. So that's how our program runs. But they end up by the end with 300 hours of classroom instruction time. And they have 3,200 to 4,000 on-the-job training log hours. And that little discrepancy is solely based upon the employer. If the employer feels that their employee is ready at 3,200 hours, then they make that decision. If they think they need a few more hours, then they can take them up to 4,000. When someone completely finishes the ACDS program, they get to move on the West Virginia Career Pathway to a level 5, and it only goes to 8. So they're a little above half on that career pathway. We do include family providers in our program as well. Since family providers do not have a direct supervisor, we provide them with a mentor, and that mentor visits them regularly a couple times a month. We'll attend class with them. We'll meet with them and ask them if they have any questions, helps them find resources that they may need to help them with the classes and on their pathway. Graduates also, and this is fairly new, this started about 1.5 years ago, get paid an incentive every year of $500, and that's every year they can apply for that. So that kind of gives them a little bit of income boost. And it also, the apprenticeship degree or certificate qualifies them to be a pre-K or kindergarten aide in West Virginia. We're written into that policy. They can be a type 2 center director, they can be an assistant director, a teacher, or assistant teacher. So they have options in their career. I wanted to kind of include, this is an easy way for me to kind of explain the structure of our program in West Virginia, is to look at it as a pyramid. Of course, the bottom partners are the Department of Labor, and I technically work for River Valley Child Development Services. In the beginning, the director of River Valley Child Development Services was the person who had this idea for an apprenticeship program. So she pursued the Department of Labor, and so they ended up partnering to fund this project. And then we have established a state executive council. Okay, so this council oversees all of the policies and procedures of our program. They help with the implementation of our program. And we meet quarterly. I facilitate those meetings. I report, our status, our classes, what kind of numbers we have going, any issues, and that state council is very active in keeping our program running very smoothly. And the council is made up of, I'm jumping ahead of myself, but it's made up of stakeholders throughout the state. Every county has a person that attends this. We have our funding sources attend this, representatives from pre-K, Head Start attend this meeting. So it's about 30 people every quarter. And then beneath the state council, we have local councils. And the local councils are set up everywhere we have classes. So in each of the counties or county clusters that are holding classes, we have local councils. And those local councils, again, are made up of Head Start and directors and pre-K and the Board of Ed in that particular area. And they come together and they address their unique needs in their particular area. And then they take that to the executive council. And then we have our supervisors and our mentor and our apprentices. And that whole structure, there can't be a piece missing. If I don't have a local council, I've got to start there before I can have classes. So it's very much built off of each other, and all of those people have to be there to make this program work the way we have it designed. So, next slide, please. These are some of the stats, some of the numbers that I pulled together. We have typically about 320 students a semester. We typically have about 28. I think this semester we have 31 classes. I think our budget, that's about the max that we can do, is 31 classes across the state. It takes about 2 years for people to complete the entire program. Now, if someone is only working part-time or for some reason has taken medical leave of absence and hasn't worked a full year, it may take them 3 years to get the 3,200 training hours. It's funny that you mentioned the wage. Our average wage increase is 50 cents, which we admit is not great, but that is the minimum that we have set up with the Department of Labor that they have to receive. And typically they receive, after second semester, a pay increase and then a pay increase at the end. We currently have 158 employer agreements, and we have it set up just like you do, that we actually sponsor all of them. So we gather all of those employer agreements ourselves. Since we do have our own curriculum, we also have to hire and contract instructors. So we have about 50 current instructors throughout the state who do this curriculum for us. And to date, we have about 4,000 graduates or journey persons. And we have about 14 articulation agreements with our community colleges and universities. So,
Wonderful.
yeah, we've
Thank
been busy. You're
Enormous
welcome.
amount of partners who are busy. So I want to open up the discussion. Cheryl, I'm going to ask you, you have an enormous amount of experience in workforce development, and I really think my understanding is that you came to this from more of the workforce side, not early childhood. Can you talk to us a little bit about how did early childhood come into your purview? How did you come to be interested in an early childhood apprenticeship, and what did it take to convince those in workforce that this was the right avenue?
Yeah, so our organization is a labor management partnership of the National Union of Hospital and Healthcare Employees and 50 employers. Our union also represents childcare workers, especially family childcare workers, throughout the state of Pennsylvania. And the training fund has always been focused on career pathways. We're 46 years old now, and we've created a variety. We have, I think, 14 different apprenticeship programs in healthcare, human services, as well as early childcare. We've always had that focus on access to career paths. And, when I looked around, there was nothing that our early childcare workers had access to that came close to what our healthcare workers had access to. And so I began to think about that. And actually, from 2000 to 2004, we had 2 large DOL grants that supported our first pilot apprenticeship program, probably about the same time you got started. What I learned was that we weren't able to continue because we didn't embed it in our state system. We didn't embed the registered apprenticeship. And so when it came around this time, it's been my goal, and I think we're making huge steps forward to make sure that what we're doing, really honoring what you have done, is really embedded in the whole state system. And that's what's going to create sustainability. The other piece that was very important that we learned from our first experience is that we really needed a degree pathway. So we created this partnership around registered apprenticeship as a degree pathway, resulting potentially in a bachelor's degree. We wanted our frontline workforce to have access to the entire pathway. And we've found so many committed childcare workers like Jamila who work all day, and then the way this program is designed, give up their evenings, weekends, et cetera, to take classes and move themselves forward, usually 2 classes a semester. I can't tell you how much commitment that takes. And we can talk about the resources necessary to support that.
I think, yeah, that's on everyone's mind.
Right.
So I might move that to Jennifer and Paula. I mean, you guys have been at the forefront. How have you kept so many partners engaged and working and committed? And if you want to get into the resources a bit, how has the funding sort of flowed over the course of the development of your apprenticeship program?
I really think, and Paula has been actually in the apprenticeship program world longer than me, but from my perspective, and I think about this a lot because I do sit and, when I have those days when phone's ringing and I'm on email and thinking about how does all of this come together, and it really is amazing, and I think West Virginia is very blessed and should be very thankful for what we have in this apprenticeship program. It started off very small. It started off 1 county, 1 class, and it just exploded and it blossomed. And I really believe it was because the people, the community saw it worked. They saw that it was making a difference for everybody involved. The students were learning. They were taking that information and they were eager, to go back and apply that in the classroom. And it gave them a sense of professionalism, and they were proud of what they were doing. And then their employers saw that, and they saw, it isn't the skill and drill, the 2 hours here, 2 hours there. It meant something. And so they saw a difference in that classroom. And then on the state level, when they would go in, licensing would go in and evaluate the programs, they saw, hey, this is working. This is making a difference. The quality in this program where someone has taken the apprenticeship program versus the quality in this program when someone hasn't. It's an obvious difference. So I really think it was the community buy-in that the program is working. And little by little, the classes came from, 2 classes to 10 classes to 15 to, at one time we actually had to turn classes down because we didn't have the funding to do over 30. And all of those partners that I talked about for years, those were all volunteers. They were all volunteers. Right now, we are able to compensate most of them, except the executive council. They remain volunteers. But we do offer small stipends to our supervisors, our mentors, and our local councils. But it truly was a buy-in and that they believed in this program.
And Paula, you're a former apprentice as well as now working with the apprenticeship model, right?
I don't work with the apprenticeship model directly, but yes, I graduated from the apprenticeship program when I was still doing family childcare, like in 1999, somewhere around there. But as an infant toddler specialist, I teach a 10-module class that is based off of the program of infant and toddler caregivers from West Ed in California. And we have an articulation with ACDS in that when students take, the nickname for that class is WIVET. So my WIVET graduates can skip the first semester of ACDS because they're similar now and start with the second semester. So that's kind of my tie-in because, I help, because I have filled out the OJT forms, I can help my students do that, encourage them to get into that apprenticeship program.
So really seamless transition.
Yeah,
Yes.
we worked very hard to do that. We recently wrote a new curriculum, and it's probably been statewide all 4 semesters for about a year now. But part of the people at the table writing this new curriculum, one of them was a representative from our infant toddler at the DHHR level. And so we worked very hard to make our first semester infant toddler curriculum what they were teaching in their infant toddler West Virginia, so that students wouldn't have to repeat the same information. So we worked very well, I believe, in West Virginia to make all of our efforts to make everything seamless for the student.
Fantastic. We have just a moment for the panel questions. I want to make sure that we hear from Jamila and your experience as being an apprentice and what that's meant for your classroom.
It's meant a lot for me in my classroom being an apprentice. I've been in early childhood education for about 20 years, and I've always wanted to work towards some type of a degree, but it was very difficult and also slow going. But when I learned about the program through my employer and I joined the program, it was it helped to speed me along. I saw actually like a goal in sight, and actually I finished, graduated my associates in May 2019, and having support with the mentors and from Cheryl, the 1199C Foundation, my employer, being able to complete the competencies and taking the information that I was learning in class and applying it in my classroom. And now I'm working towards my bachelor's in early childhood.
Congratulations. And we thank you for your work in the classroom so much.
Thank you.
So now we have a healthy amount of questions from our audience, and we will try to do our best to get to as many of them as possible. What are some creative ways that we can use registered apprenticeships for family child care? Are there apprenticeship opportunities to work with our home-based providers? And I think West Virginia really has the experience there.
And that was Paula's experience. She was a family child care provider. So I'll let you take that question.
Okay, so one of the advantages that I had is in working with my mentor encouraged me to take advantage of the articulation with Marshall Community College at the time. I got about halfway through that first semester, and I was fortunate that my children were college age when I started, so I qualified for a FAFSA grant. And then because I was a part-time student, I also qualified for what West Virginia had at the time, a higher education for part-time students. And there was also a child care grant that gave me a stipend and paid for one class. So that's what I used to go to summer school. It took me about 5 years going part-time to get my bachelor's degree. So I think one of the things we need to help with family child care is help them be aware of what kind of grants are out there, or to make them more available, or have more of them available, and just kind of give support that way.
And I know Pennsylvania is trying to work towards engaging family child care.
Yes, we do actually have a few family child care students in our registered apprenticeship program. It's very exciting, and it's been wonderful to see how they've been able to create a wonderful coaching system within their home-based environments. Coaching, I'd like to just point out, is key to the apprenticeship program. We take the time to train coaches up front and support coaches with what we call mentors who are supporting the coaches to provide high quality coaching to our apprentices. And we're able to do that in small family centers as well as larger places. It does take a big commitment of the employer though. The coach meets weekly with the apprentice, assesses competency attainment, and now we have our higher eds coming in because they're giving college credit for on-the-job learning, wanting to see evidence of competency attainment. And I'm such a big fan now of competency-based education because NACE's standards are is the seamless transition between the employer and the higher ed, and we can use those same competencies in both settings and apply them on the job and apply them in the classroom. And when the coaches get that, in the family setting, in the center-based care, it's just a win-win for everybody.
Jamila, did you find that in your experience having the coach and the supports, and I know with the coursework as well, is really for the early learning environment?
Yes, my coach and I, when I started, my coach was my lead teacher in the classroom, so we were able to work together very closely. But then she left the center, and then I had another coach. And also, we still work together very closely each week to complete my competencies. She would come and observe me doing activities and interacting and engaging with the children. And it was a big support, like having her, if I had a question or anything that I was struggling with, I could go to her and have her, help me. So yeah, having a coach, a mentor was very, it made a big difference, having the support.
Yeah, tremendous resource.
Yeah.
So we are going to move into, we have a couple of questions around higher education. And I have one here. Is it possible to see apprenticeship completion translating into college credits which articulate to degrees? And I think that question of articulation, how has Pennsylvania and West Virginia been able to have the apprenticeships support articulation, which I know can be tricky in working with some of our higher ed partners?
Yeah, we actually recently, with our new curriculum, are working on re-articulating and updating all of our agreements. And of course, by now, after 31 years, everyone in the state's quite familiar with our curriculum, but basically we sit at the table with the colleges and the universities and the early ed departments and share our curriculum, break it down, show exactly our objectives and how it's laid out. They look at it, and right now, West Virginia is actually, all of the community colleges are trying to work together to have a core curriculum, and so we're going to articulate with all 12 at one time with this, and it looks like we're going to get about 12 hours toward an associate degree. WVU gives about 12 hours toward their bachelor as well, so that's kind of, 12 seems to be what we're working with across the board, but 12 hours of college credit for $100 is a pretty good deal.
So in Pennsylvania, we've done two things. We've articulated the CDA, the Child Development Associate, to the associate degree. And most colleges are awarding 9 credits for that. Some where it's offered at the college level are as many as 12 credits. But then the key piece was getting credit for on-the-job learning. And so at the associate level, we've been able to get 9 credits for on-the-job learning. So that's 9 for the CDA, 9 for the on-the-job. That's 18 credits.
That's great.
6 college courses that you don't have to sit in a classroom for, that you can use competency-based learning to be awarded college credits. But the trick then is getting the associate degree articulated with the bachelor's degree. And that's where I think we're making great progress in Pennsylvania, which is really exciting to see Arcadia University accepting all of Community College of Philadelphia's associate degree as a program-to-program articulation instead of a course-to-course articulation, where there are no prerequisites required. You enter as a junior to the bachelor's degree with teaching certification attached to it, is an amazing accomplishment. So right now we have 2 bachelor degree programs in Pennsylvania, Carlow University and in the southwestern part of the state, and Arcadia in the southeast. And we have 4-year universities sitting at the table with us now. So we're very, very excited that this is going to expand.
And in working with higher education, were there any barriers at first that you encountered? That was another question we got from our audience. They really wanted to know how you were able to dismantle them in working with higher education partners.
So I'm going to mention a couple of barriers. One barrier which is ongoing is the math barrier, and I think we got to put it out there and be very honest about it. Math is a requirement at the associate and bachelor degree level, and there's an exam called the PAPA, which you have to pass at the English and math level. A lot of early ed graduates at the associate degree have difficulty passing the math PAPA. And so we were able with Arcadia to get 4 different math, two sequence courses, 2 different sequence math courses to qualify if the student gets a B or better at the associate level, that they don't have to sit for the PAPA. That is huge. Did you receive that?
Yes.
Yay for you! And so that is a huge barrier to overcome.
Yeah.
A second big barrier is credit for on-the-job learning and competency-based learning. Let's face it, that's new for traditional colleges. And so right now we're building the plane as we're flying it, but we're seeing the higher eds getting very interested in, well, what evidence is needed to show that this is worthy of college credit? You know, other than just a competency assessment checklist that shows when it was assessed and what method was used to assess it by the coach. They now want to see evidence, and I think that's a good thing because it's strengthening our on-the-job learning experience and the coaching experience. So these barriers are worthwhile tackling because once you do, you're increasing the both the relevancy of the program, the registered apprenticeship as a degree path program, but you're also increasing the quality of the apprentice that's graduating.
And hearing directly from an apprentice, we have a question for you, Jamila. They'd like to know, what was the program's impact on your classroom and the children that you serve every day?
The impact for my classroom was to be able to learn better practices, how to engage children more professionally, being able to take what I was learning from the classroom and bringing it into the classroom, and it impacted my classroom because I was able to share with my team that I was learning this. Like, say, example, like my special ed class, I could apply it to maybe like some children that was in that I saw that was having difficulties and struggles, and then it was like, you know, like a light bulb moment, like, oh, I can use this activity or this information to help support and, you know, the child in my classroom.
That's wonderful. Paul, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you the same.
I think one of the things that struck me is that I realized I was already doing a lot of stuff right. I just didn't know that I was doing it right or why I was doing it right. And so once I understood the why behind what I was doing, it made it easier for me to implement what needed to be done and build on that. And of course, being in family childcare, I had mixed age groups, and that was somewhat muddling for my classmates and my instructors. It's just like, how can you do this with an age group from infants to 12? And I'm just like, you know, it's family childcare, it's family oriented, and to quote from Prime Times, we don't have children in litters. So I always have a hard time understanding why we are so focused on having a 1-year-old class, a 2-year-old class, a 3-year-old class, you know, coming from that background, and that the children actually learn from each other. You know, a lot of that social emotional development for my older children were coming from being able to care for the younger children. So, but the biggest thing was just like, hey, I have a lot I'm doing right, and now I know how to do more right.
And we have another question I think is reflective of your ability to support family child care, and it's really, how can the apprenticeships help build the supply in rural areas where we know family child care is often the choice for families, and these communities in particular. So how's that worked in West Virginia? And I know, Shirley, you also have some experience as Pennsylvania's expanded into rural areas.
We specifically seek family providers out. We do mailings, we do visits, we have direct contact with them. We're fortunate where our funding does come from the Department of Health and Human Resources, the Division of Early Care and Education, that everyone is on board together. So when the specialists go out to the family homes to have contact with them, they tell them about the program. Yeah, we're not a secret, but our curriculum is also where we do have our own curriculum, and we go directly to those counties. They see it in their backyard, so to speak. They see the instructor is from their area. The classmates are right there in their area, their county, within a few miles of them, and they really build their own support system. Family childcare in West Virginia is welcome in all aspects. I mean, it's not seen as an untapped potential or an untapped group. You can speak to that as well.
Well,
Paula,
so we
but-
also, there are several family child care associations throughout the state, and there's also a statewide association that really help encourage family child care providers to get involved in the apprenticeship program, and the fact that it's in the evening is very helpful for a lot of them to be able to get in it. When I was in the apprenticeship program, I was kind of in the second cohort that went through, and so my other family child care providers, because we at that time had, the Cowboy and Family Child Care Association, which I helped start, is still in existence. They were very helpful to me in getting in line with classwork. And so there's still that camaraderie and that support system, and our family child care associations will very much encourage family child care providers to enter into the program and then offer them extra support as they do their classwork.
And in our curriculum as well, we not only talk about child care regulations, we also talk about family and child care regulations, which is a different set. So we very intentionally have included them in this
Because
curriculum.
we have 3 different sets of regs.
Yes.
We,
Yep. Yeah.
we have the center-based regs. We also have a category called family child care facility, which is up to 12 children. And then we have family child care, and each one of those entities have their own set of regulations.
Yep. Yeah. A lot to unpack. And Cheryl, have you been supporting the expansion of the apprenticeship across Pennsylvania? Have you found that there are nuances in the more rural regions of the Commonwealth and
Definitely.
how the apprenticeship is able to meet their needs?
Definitely. We are working with this amazing employer partner, Learning Lamp, in rural Pennsylvania. And I've learned a lot from the experience of working with the executive director, Leah, because she has been so creative in opening up the apprenticeship program to her workforce and now to employers in her area. It's a totally rural area. And what we've done is there's a partnership that's been created with Shippensburg University, which is a couple of hours away, where she brought her coaches there to get trained by Shippensburg, had an opening orientation, and got everybody excited who were her apprentices at Shippensburg. But then they went back to rural Pennsylvania, and the classes are being offered online to her workforce from the university with on-site coaches then trained who are available to support the apprentices. And so she's now created this rural model that I think will be able to expand throughout Pennsylvania. And we have quite a few of our higher ed partners now that have their courses online. So it's really going to be an opportunity for employers to choose the higher ed partner they want to work with in Pennsylvania and begin that process of implementing the program just like it would be implemented anywhere else in Pennsylvania. So I feel really excited that we were able to, through the work of this one person, really figure out what that model would look like for rural Pennsylvania. And they're off and running. They have 7 apprentices as we speak.
So we're getting close to the end of our time for our audience questions. I just want to ask real quickly, we did have a question around what's the average time horizon for an apprentice in an established program like West Virginia and Pennsylvania? What's the average cost per pupil? You did mention earlier.
I do have it.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to start?
As far as out of pocket, like I said, we have a registration fee is what we call it of $25, and It used to only be 10, and we recently raised it to 25. And what we do with that $25, it goes back to the student. When they register for class and they get class, they actually get a packet every semester of all of their assignments, all of the instructors' PowerPoints, everything that they're going to go over in that class. They get a little 3-ring binder full of that information, and then the curriculum gets printed for the instructors. So that's kind of what we use that $25 for. The breakdown of our budget, as far as how we pay our instructors and all of that, we have about $125,000 that we work with. That does not include my salary or the other ACDS staff. There's only 2 of us. Our salaries or anything like that, but that's strictly paying our instructors, paying our local council, paying our mentors. So that's the kind of budget that we're working for.
Thank you.
So we created a pretty comprehensive model, right? It includes academic bridge classes for the frontline workers, so to be successful in a college setting. We've been able to use Title II funding for that from the Department of Education. We have counseling supports and tutoring supports for the apprentices. We have raised the funds through Philanthropy for something that really is unfunded, which is the role of the intermediary. You're an intermediary, we're an intermediary. We're putting the whole program together, we're making it work. There's no funding for that. The funding is for tuition. Teach, for example, or FAFSA, Title IV. But the funding to make the program work, to organize it, to keep it sustainable, there is no funding. And so Philanthropy has been critical with that role. Through the workforce boards, we can get funding to support the coaching, to support even tuition. But the workforce boards don't have the funds for intermediaries either. So it's an unfunded mandate that I really challenge us all to think about how we're going to handle, because to build capacity, you need an intermediary. But when we look at the funding, what we did is we put together the whole program from Title II funds, teach funds, philanthropic funds, government funds. And so we divided our budget into kind of 3 categories: the low budget, the midpoint, and the high touch budget. We have all 3 in Pennsylvania. And I'm talking about an associate degree right now, the whole associate degree. On the low budget side, because of Teach, which is paying 90% of the tuition, in Pennsylvania 5% comes from the employer, 5% from the apprentice, pays for books, transportation, and some release time. But when you put together our budget, it's as little as $5,400 per year, or $16,004 for the whole apprenticeship, for the whole associate degree. And that includes all of the services, including the intermediary work. To the high touch, which has tons of supports, even helps to pay the cost for the tuition, so it's totally without cost to the apprentice. The high touch, which is not unusual for an apprenticeship program, is about $20,000 a year. Okay, and for the whole degree, obviously it gets more. If you look on average at what apprenticeship programs cost across the board, across industries, $20,000 is about average. And that's what a really high quality apprenticeship program would cost. The $5,000, $5,400 a year program is not going to have the level of supports or the level of coaching supports and tutoring that the $20,000 a year budget has. You can do it, but it's going to be bare bones.
Well, I think we can unequivocally say that our teachers and the children who benefit are worth it.
Yes.
So I want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise and for sharing your story. I also want to point out to the folks that are joining us via webcast, we have a range of resources for you all. BPC has a discussion guide for those of you that want to continue the discussion in your communities that is posted to the website, where you will also find a link to the recorded webcast. We also want to keep the conversation going, so if you have questions that weren't asked today and would like to follow up with the panelists, please email your questions to bipartisaninfo@bipartisanpolicy.org. That's bipartisaninfo@bipartisanpolicy.org, and we will post the questions and answers and follow up with all of our panelists in a blog post in the future, because we really do want to be able to answer all your questions and keep the conversation going. You have a wealth of information for all of us. We also have an explainer from First 5 Years Fund that's really helpful if you want to talk to your leadership at the local level. That's posted to their website. And District 1199C has a replication toolkit for communities and states that are interested in replicating the CDA to the AA apprenticeship model. It's very thorough, it's free, it's available on their website that you'll see listed on the slide. And we thank you so much for your time and attention today and for joining us.
Thank you.